Hi, this is Rosie and welcome to Rosie Reacts. Today I'm going to be reacting to something that my subscribers have recommended, which is the BTS On Music Video Meaning Explained by Bookish Theories. Now this is a very long video, it's almost 30 minutes, but I'm really curious about the significance behind the video, so I'm going to go ahead and dive into this. I'm going to try not to pause too much because I really don't want to make this an hour-long reaction. But yeah, let's get into this and check out exactly what analysis there is.
Hello and welcome back to Bookish Theories. In today's video, I would like to talk about BTS's On official music video, focusing on a full breakdown and analysis of this visual masterpiece and all the possible references and symbols that they included in the video. Now, this MV has a huge amount of information to unpack. So, in order to understand what BTS is doing here, the first thing that we need to do is to consider the message that the boys are trying to convey. According to the Big Hit press release, the video symbolically depicts BTS's vow to accept their predestined path as fate and keep going on no matter the obstacles. Right off the bat, this is very important. The point of On and Map of the Soul 7 as a whole is to become self-aware and accept all parts of our identity. It's an inner journey, if you will, whose goal is to bring us beyond the mask of the persona, confront and accept the shadow, and allow the ego to work in our favor in order to move on and embrace our destiny. Since an important part of the album revolves around celebrating BTS's growth and looking back at the past, another aspect to consider
I just think it's kind of funny because I literally just reacted to the Black Swan music video. And at the end, when the shadow recedes, I said, is that like part of it when they like accept that part of themselves, they're able to move forward? And that's basically what she just said. So I don't know, I'm feeling proud of myself. But yeah, let's move on because, yeah, we have a long video to watch.
here is how they deal with the ideas of time and journey. As we'll see in a second, the video shows the boys in many different settings inspired by a number of sources. Just to name a few, we can see some obvious references to the Bible, to historical events that span over the course of several centuries, as well as some callbacks to modern literature and cinema. All these elements are put together into a coherent narrative that is meant to convey a universal message of hope, rebirth, and unity. But in order to understand why and how all of this actually makes sense, we need to take a step back and look at the boys' performance at the MAMA 2019. Back then, their stage was called Map of the Soul Journey to Myself, and the performance was divided into 3 segments titled Future Meets Past Calling, Past Meets Present World, and Present Meets Future Eternal Journey. Now, in the context of the On music video, this is important for a couple of reasons. On the one hand, that performance introduced us to the idea that in order to understand BTS's story, we need to see time as a cycle that constantly repeats. As Namjoon said in the VCR, past, present, and future exist together inside the 7 members of BTS. And this is because if we see time as a cycle, this repetition implies that everything is connected and that all of us live in the past, in the present, and in the future at the same time. This is exactly what is taking place in the On music video. That is, the representation of past, present, and future coming together at the same time, whose climax is the ending of a cycle and the beginning of a new one. This is the eternal journey that they mentioned during the MAMA performance. Since every one of us is a...
Well, when they say that everyone lives in like the past, present, and future at the same time, is that, I don't know. I don't know, the only way that I can like picture that is that like we think of our past and like we think on our past actions and how that made us who we are, but we're also living in the moment now, but also aspiring to do things in the future. So that way. But if there's a different way, or how do you interpret that? Let me know in the comments.
Microcosmos, that is, a small replica of the universe we all share. Our inner journey is ongoing and never-ending. And much like what we see in the video, the constant rebirth that takes place inside of ourselves is also used as a metaphor for mankind's journey as a whole. This is also why during the promotion, the boys put so much attention on the idea of connecting the dots. Every person, every moment in time, every story, every art form, every symbol even, is born out of the same source. So, as we see in the video, everything is connected together into a huge universal narrative. This is an idea that was inspired by Carl Jung's theory of collective unconscious, which revolves around the concept that inside of every one of us there is an individual personal consciousness, but also a universal one that in turn connects us to everything else. Jung used this theory to explain all the recurring symbols, themes, and imagery that we can find in dreams, religion, mythology, and literature all over the world. So in case you're wondering why the On music video is mixing all these different things together, well, the answer starts from here. In the video, we are literally seeing everything. It's the collective unconscious coming to life on screen, the visual representation of the connection between us and the world, but also the history of mankind facing their struggles but always find a way to overcome them and move on. In the video, we see that each member has its own story, right? But each of their stories are connected to one another in order to represent the inner journey all of us have to go through, both individually and as part of humanity. At the beginning, we see Jin in the middle of a battlefield. Now, at first glance, the fact that he's dressed in period clothing and the presence of the banners, bows, arrows, and spears would suggest that what we are seeing here is the aftermath of a war that took place in a distant past. If you look closely, however, the victims of this conflict are actually dressed in modern clothing, which implies that this is meant to be a representation of war throughout the ages.
I did not notice that.
No matter what century we are talking about here, humanity has always faced periods of conflict that brought death and destruction. And every time we reach this level of desperation, the misery that surrounds us makes us think that there is no hope for the future. This idea is conveyed by Jin finding the dove killed by an arrow. The dove here is a universal symbol of peace and hope, but the violence of war killed it, leaving only death and no hope for the future. The fact that Jin actually takes the bird and protects it in a cage, however, is already an indication that this feeling of hopelessness is not permanent. Even if right now peace and hope seem lost forever, his choice to protect the animal is meant to show that people always find a way to hold on. This sense of endurance and perseverance is also
what's that story? Like Pandora's box, right? When everything else fled out of the box, the one thing that remained was hope, right? So yeah, I think we do have hope is a hard thing to completely stomp out and kill. Right, so I like that. I like the amount of symbolism they're putting into this. I'm gonna try not to pause too much, but yeah, every now and then I do have to pause because I don't like talking over the videos too much because I feel like I miss stuff.
Invading the next scene, where we see Jungkook running away from a large building, while his hands are tied in a chain of thorns, which, as we'll see in a second, is one of the many religious references he and the others are associated with. His outfit actually recalls those of the innocents forced into
It did kind of remind me of that
this
scene of like that 12 Years a Slave. It reminded me of that when I was watching, but I didn't mention it.
Hardships. So the fact that his shackles are made out of thorns implies that he is in the process of setting himself free from his personal form of oppression. Next up we see Jimin, whose scene shows a child sitting on a track and dozens of drums abandoned on the side. Now this part here is very interesting because the imagery of this scene was inspired by a number of different sources. On the one hand, the drums and the child playing the drums recall the figure of the drummer boy during the American Civil War. During the war, the kids who were too young to fight were often given the task to play the drums on the battlefield in order to deliver the orders and give encouragement to the army. Even if they didn't actually fight, their role put them right into the middle of the battle.
No, I
And
never
since
knew
they didn't
this.
carry
I
any
I think I'd
weapons, they
heard
were
the
often
term drummer
caught
boy,
in
but
the
I never really knew what it
crossfire.
was.
The fact that there are so many drums here implies that before this child, other children had this role but were lost in the war. So much
That's
like what
sad.
we're seeing in Jinsin, Jimin's is meant to portray the sacrifice of innocent life during a time of conflict. This
Jeez
idea is
Louise.
also conveyed with the track and the actual appearance of the child. Because if on the one hand the boy is wearing blue and white stripes
See,
that recall the
that's what I
uniform
thought.
of the
Like, cause
victims of the
I did rewatch the music videos several times, and I noticed that he had like the shaved head and the striped pajamas, and like not striped pajamas, striped clothing, from like the Holocaust and the concentration camps and stuff like that. So that's what I noticed. I just didn't know like exactly why they had put that in the video. But the drummer boy stuff, I did not really have any idea about that because I didn't know what a drummer boy was.
Holocaust. The actual track is very similar to the ones that were used to move the prisoners from one deportation camp to another. No matter how you want to see it here, the point of the scene is basically to represent the loss of innocence and the sacrifice of the weak. But if we consider the visuals from the perspective of Jung's theories, then the boy could also be a representation of the inner child, which embodies the childlike aspect of our identity, the human need for self-expression, and the original self of an individual. This is
Are like all of the BTS songs on the album named after concepts from you? Because now we got like Shadow and Persona and Ego. Inner Child, I didn't even know was something that he did too. So like, are all the songs have not like? I feel like it can't be because like Moon doesn't sound like a concept. But are there other songs that are named after those concepts too?
important because if we see the boy as an extension of Jimin himself, this means that the beginning of his inner journey implied a loss of innocence and the sacrifice of his youth. In the
That
context
is
of the
kind of true. I
lyrics,
mean, they
this makes
started really
sense
young,
because
so they
up
didn't
to
really
this
get to
point,
do
Jimin is still
like
talking about the
regular
initial stages
teenage
of his
things.
quest. At the beginning, the song talks about the confusion that they feel and the shadow growing. And this is because up to this point, they still need to connect all parts of themselves in order to achieve harmony. This idea is also conveyed in Taeyang's scene, where we see him laying on the ground next to a young girl with a blindfold on. Now, this part is very similar to the animation that we saw in Make It Right, and because of that, a lot of people think that the
I
girl
didn't
actually
watch the
represents
animated video.
Army. As we'll see in a second, this actually makes a lot of sense, but as always, there are also other sources that we need to consider. According to Rena Johnson, for instance, who is the actress who plays the girl, her role was actually that of Taeyong's sister. This could be a reference to his storyline within the Bangtan universe. But on a general level, the fact that they chose a blonde actress who is also half Japanese could be a way to show that the connection we all share goes beyond any culture or ethnicity. Since we are all connected with each other, this connection implies that we should all treat each other as brothers and sisters. And this idea is further developed with the imagery associated with self-sacrifice and protection. You see, at the beginning of the scene, Taeyang is posing in a way that strongly recalls the crucifixion of Christ, which is a symbol that represents Jesus' sacrifice and pain, but also the moment in which he finally accepts his fate. As I mentioned earlier, this is the whole point behind the song. And the fact that this pose is also referenced in Interlude Shadow and in JK's Save Me stage makes me think that the boys all represent different parts of an individual that are experiencing the same process. Back in the Manifesto
Love how
film,
they
Taeyang
tie
had a
their
tattoo
stuff
that
all
said
together.
the shadow like me, which implies that this journey is meant to bring them to accept the shadow as part of themselves. But at this stage of the song, we are not there yet, because he is still crucified, and above his head we see an installation made out of broken instruments, feathers and arrows. If we consider its placement, the installation could be a symbol of the burden he's carrying on his shoulders. But this burden is still a secret, because at this point the girl is still blindfolded. If we see the girl as Army and V as the hero here, or even better, if we see the girl as a symbol of future generations and him as one of the leaders that will show them the beginning of a new cycle, this could imply that he's keeping his burden a secret as a form of protection. Bear in mind, later in the video, we see that this scene is actually taking place in front of the entrance of a giant maze. The design of the setting here is very similar to the Maze Runner movies. But if you look closely, Taehyung doesn't remove the girl's blindfold until the maze is finally open. In that scene, the symbol of his struggle is gone and a new path is opening in front of them. So this implies that in the first scene, we see the moments that anticipate his acceptance of the shadow. Another possible way to explain all of this is that the girl actually represents Taehyung's anima. That is the hidden feminine side of a man, which in this case is fittingly portrayed as a child. Since we are still in the process of accepting the shadow, that part of himself is still isolated from him. He is still suffering on the cross, but things change when Namjoon takes the stage. Now, Joon's scene is possibly the easiest one to understand here, because its setting is an obvious reference to Noah's Ark, which is the boat that Noah used to save animals and humanity from a flood sent from God. In the context of the music video, this reference is important for a couple of reasons. On the one hand, Noah's story plays a lot with the idea that the destiny of a single person can affect the world as a whole. So right off the bat, this is very fitting with the overall concept they are going for here. On the other, however, this reference is important because Noah's story marks a moment of change that symbolizes the ending of a cycle and the beginning of a new one. This makes sense because in the song, RM's lyrics are the ones that first introduce the idea that the shadow is a part of themselves and that it's time to accept their destiny. So if we consider that in the video the sails are worn out, which implies that the flood has already taken place, Namjoon's verse marks the beginning of an important change, which is them accepting their calling and moving towards the future starting from the past.
Who thought of all of this?
When we get to the pre-chorus, the video goes back to check on Jin. In the scene, we see him holding the cage with the dead dove in a room filled with empty cages. And this is important because it shows us that what is happening now has already happened before and will happen again. As I said earlier, this is an eternal journey based on cycles and repetition. So much like it's foreshadowed by the Noah reference, which, like this scene, implies a metaphorical first death followed by a rebirth, this scene actually shows us the bird coming back to life. What's interesting here is how this event is related to the others. If you look closely, this rebirth comes right after we see Jimin reaching out to the child and right before we see JK run for his life. When it comes to the universal...
I did notice that, like, after watching the videos, the music video a couple times, and I was just like, what's going on? I was like, is he a sorcerer? I couldn't understand it quite well, so I'm curious what she's gonna say. And also noticed that, like, when Jimin fell, that's when JK Jungkook fell as well. So yeah, let's see what she's gonna say.
Story that they're telling us. This means that hope, that is, the dove, will never truly die as long as people keep going. War, injustice, oppression will always be a part of humanity because they can be seen as a universal shadow that haunts us all. But if we accept this darkness as part of life, then we are strong enough to move on. On the other hand, however, the fact that Jimin reaching out to the child is followed by a rebirth implies that in order to achieve harmony, we have to reach out inside of ourselves. This is because the inner journey the boys are portraying here follows the same basic structure of the hero's journey to the underworld that was already foreshadowed back in Make It Right.
Okay, apparently like I have to watch the animated version of that.
Descending to the underworld, complete the task and then come back up. BTS's inner journey basically revolves around them becoming aware of their persona, descending into themselves to reach the shadow, having a moment of communion with the ego, and coming back up as a new individual. It's a cycle of life, death, and rebirth that repeats over and over again. And the bird who was alive, found dead, and is now reborn is one of the many symbols that shows this process. The video, however, gives us very little time to celebrate, because as soon as the bird is reborn, the cycle resets and JK actually dies. This is confirmed by the scene with J-Hope, where we see a raven pecking at JK's body. Now, in Jung, the raven is a symbol of the shadow, so Jungkook's death is once again a metaphor for him coming into contact with the darkest part of himself. But since the raven is a scavenger bird that feeds off the dead but doesn't actually kill to survive, the animal is also a symbol of the reconciliation between life and death. Now, this is important because J-Hope's scene here is all about reconciling opposites. If you look closely, this part is heavily focused on contrast. We have green grass and dead trees, Hobie's modern outfit and JK's period clothing, and most importantly, we have one member spitting bars while the other is dead in the background. But what does it all mean? Well, in order to understand this part, we need to take a closer look at the lyrics. In his verse, Hobie embraces the pain without fear because his experiences made him strong enough to overcome his difficulties. This means that the pain of the past made him strong in the present. So if Namjoon's verse marked the first stage of this journey, Hobie's lines represent the past meeting the present, that is, them realizing that they're strong enough to face the world. This is why Hobie here is facing ahead instead of worrying about what's behind him. As I mentioned earlier, each of the boys here have their own story. But
it's
they
like
also
everything, every little thing has meaning, and that just blows my mind.
The raven pecking at JK's body represents Hobie's shadow feeding off of him in the past. This is the reason why Hobie has a modern outfit while JK doesn't. They represent different stages of growth and different moments in time.
See, when I went back to rewatch and I noticed that, I was just like, is this time traveling? What's going on?
The struggle of man is also reflected on the world. If you look closely, the trees that come out the grass look very similar to the thorns around JK's wrists. So this scene is basically showing us Hobie moving on from the past while also recognizing and embracing the scars that made him the person he is today. Next up we have Suga's scene, which made me scream in frustration because it took me half a day to figure this out. Now, in many respects, this part shows us the follow-up of what happens in Hobie's scene. Here we see Yoongi in a temple surrounded by followers holding candles. And while the religious setting implies a moment of self-reflection and spirituality, the focus here is on the search for balance, which is something also confirmed by the symbols of the elements that we can see in the back. This is basically the stage that anticipates yet another rebirth, and in the music video, this idea is conveyed through the use of color. Now, in the scene, we see 4 dominant colors. We have black, white, yellow, and red. And this is important because these colors represent the 4 stages of alchemy, which is a natural philosophy focused on the practice of perfecting certain materials. This is relevant because Jung actually used these stages as a metaphor for the process of individuation, that is, the final goal of the map of the soul and the achievement of balance within the self. In alchemy, the first step is black, which represents a spiritual death. The second stage is white, which is the purification. The third stage is yellow, which means awakening. And the final stage is red, which symbolizes the achievement of success. Now, bear in mind, in alchemy, this process is irreversible, meaning that, much like individuation, once you achieve that final stage, you never go back. Since BTS's narrative is an eternal journey based on repetition and renewal, however, these colors are referenced to express the constant transformation our personality goes through as we gradually develop our identity. According to Jung, these stages precede the coming birth. And sure enough, after this scene, the cycle resets and JK comes back to life just in time to save humanity with his bridge. Now, at this point, you should be noticing a pattern here.
I don't know if I'm smart enough for BTS. I don't know if I'm smart enough for BTS. It's like you can literally write a term paper on their music videos. It's crazy. I mean, how is it that every little thing has some type of meaning and then ties into these concepts that are like college level? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Even if the video as a whole portrays the ending of a cycle and the beginning of a new one, throughout the video we also see shorter cycles that become more and more detailed as time goes by. In V and RM's cases, for instance, we only see symbols of death and rebirth that leave us to connect the dots. The second time instead we see the dove, and here we get more information because we see it dead and then being born again. But after that we actually see JK alive, dead and then alive again, which means that every time that a cycle resets we improve ourselves and acquire more knowledge. This is basically what happens to Jin in the Bangtan universe, but also what we've been seeing in the concepts they've been choosing for their albums. And in the final part of the video, we
no, you went too fast.
I
want to see what the
actually
concepts
see
are.
JK alive, dead, and then alive again. Which means that every time that a cycle resets, we improve ourselves and acquire more knowledge. This is basically what happens to Jin in the Bangtan universe, but also what we've been seeing in the concepts they've been
Wings, BST concept. Inside of us we have both light and darkness. True. Love yourself trilogy concept. You should love yourself no matter what people think of you. Also very true. Map the solo concept. Embrace the shadow and accept your destiny. Okay. Alright.
Been choosing for their albums. And in the final part of the video, we finally get to see the complete version of this inner journey. After JK is reborn, he approaches a pond and enters the water. The visuals here recall the rite of baptism, which is a symbol of purification and regeneration that is meant to convey the change that is taking place in the bridge. At this point of the song, the lyrics finally get to the resolution. Jungkook has finally accepted the pain and embraced his suffering. And this moment of complete self-acceptance allows him to take over and free himself from fear. As we see him immersing his stones in the water, the other members approach the entrance of the maze, followed by humanity as a whole. The choice of a single individual to accept his destiny and embrace his pain is translated into a universal movement that has the potential to change the world. In this scene, JK represents the hope of the people on the verge of a new era. He is the dove, but as we saw at the beginning, the dove has to die in order to be born again.
Yeah, and I did notice that too upon rewatching. I thought he had to be tied to the dove because when Jin let the dove go out of the cage and fly away, that's the same time when he was taking the shell out of the water, and you could see that his bindings had gone away, so he also got set free at the same time. So I figured out that had to be connected. So let me hear some more from someone who obviously did a lot of research.
Level, the hero has to go underground, complete his task,
I really
and
need
come
to
back
watch
to bring a new beginning.
that video.
And sure enough, this is what happens next. Like what happens in Noah's story, Jin frees the dove and the dove leaves to complete its task. And as the lyrics announce the hero choosing to descend into the abyss, a conch replaces Jungkook's thorns. Now, the significance of the conch here can be interpreted in different ways. On the one hand, this could be a reference to the Shanka, which is a ritual Hindu conch symbol of strength and rebirth, what sound is believed to help people overcome fear. On the other, however, this could be seen as a reference to The Lord of the Flies, which is a book about a group of boys who get stranded on an island while they try to govern themselves with disastrous consequences. In the book, the conch is initially used as a horn to find the survivors. But as the story progresses, the boys use the conch as a symbol of power. In the initial democracy that they establish, whoever holds the conch has the right to speak. So the fact that later on we see it in the hands of the shadow version of JK could be seen as a representation of the descent of the hero into the underworld, and JK actually allowing the shadow self to express itself. Whether you like one version or the other, one thing that is certain is that the conch represents some type of order. This is because this time it is their choice to descend to the underworld, their choice to let the shadow speak, and their choice to die in order to be born again. To a certain extent, this implies that the blowing of the conch could be seen as the final symbol of them accepting their destiny. They embrace the shadow and the pain that comes with it, because as Jung says, a man has to go through the inferno of his passions in order to overcome them. In the video we see that after JK blows the conch, the sky gets dark and a volcano starts erupting.
Mordor.
The visuals here recall the landscape of Mordor in The Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
But in Jung's theories, the volcano is also seen as a symbol of the brutal force of the unconscious part of ourselves. It's basically a representation of the primordial and chaotic side of ourselves that the shadow is supposed to embody. So this implies that what we are seeing in the video is the actual representation of their shadow self. The post-apocalyptic setting here is meant to convey the idea that this is the realm of darkness. It's a place inside of ourselves that is primitive, wild, and chaotic. And them experiencing this metaphorical death triggers the rebirth that we see right at the end. At this point, Jungkook finally joins the others, and together they create the shape of a bird, the symbol of hope that is also the bringer of unity.
I didn't notice that at all.
When Namjoon raises his fist and they cross the entrance, present meets future in the eternal journey of the soul. The dove that was dead at the beginning is now joined by other six, and together they fly over a rock that symbolizes their ascent into a new life. The fact that the rock here is very similar to the Pride Rock from The Lion King is no coincidence, because much like what we see in the video, The Lion King is all about the circle of life. There is a constant cycle of life, death, and rebirth that brings balance within ourselves, but also in the world that surrounds us. As the final shot of the video suggests, this is the official ending of the cycle that began with No More Dream. The dream that they had when they debuted turned into a reality, but after 7 years together and with other 7 years still to come, now it's time for a new dream, the beginning of a new cycle that is introduced by the ending of this one. As they say in We Are Bulletproof the Eternal, they started at 7, but now they are not 7 anymore. From being the ones lost in the main, the boys have now become the guides of others in a new stage of their life. And even if their journey was difficult, their experiences allow them to reach heaven. That is, to be born again as better individuals. So that's it from me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video.
Alright, let me do something real quick. I'ma like this, because that was a lot of effort she put into this video, so deserves a like. Wow. That is just insane. The amount of detail in their videos. It's truly mind-blowing. And really, I want to know what this, the person behind Bookish Theories, what they do for a living. Are they a professor? I feel like they have to be a professor to be able to break down all of this in such a coherent way, trying to make people like me who don't feel nearly as smart enough to understand this get some inkling of what's going on. But wow. My mind is still blown. That was a lot to take in. I'll probably watch this video again on my own time, just to pick up anything that maybe went over my head, because I was just like, what? But wow. How much do they themselves, like the 7 members, actually contribute to some of these ideas? Like, do they have any input? Is it all just like the production team that's actually doing the concept behind the videos and what symbols to put inside the videos? Or do they ever like actually contribute their own thoughts and contributions to the music video part of it, not the songwriting part, because I know they contribute a lot to that, and the songwriting and the song production and all that, but the actual music videos and all the symbolism and like, yeah, all of that. How much, like, do they actually contribute to that? Because if they do, that is just crazy. Like, crazy. But even if they don't, like, kudos to their team, because this is amazing. It's just amazing. Like, you could literally like do a college class just on BTS and like their music videos and things like that. That's impressive for a band to be able to do that. Yeah. But thank you a lot for recommending this video. It was really interesting, even though it was like almost 30 minutes long. I mean, it was worth it because I would have never picked up almost anything in that. I would have never picked up most of the things in the video by myself. So thank you. If you want to see more content, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.